Hello, and welcome to another edition of iDS Talks. My name is Jonathan Sachs, Chief Revenue Officer at iDS, and today I'm joined once again by my friend and colleague, Tim Latulip, out of our London office. Today, we're here to talk about D3, Tim's newsletter that he sends to a select few, although if you are interested in getting it, we'll talk about how to do that or how to get on his list at the end of this podcast. Today, though, we're talking D3 and the world of AI. So, Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to be with you as always.
So I was really excited to see this version of D3 come out because a lot of people are talking about ChatGPT, AI. Is this new? Is this not new? How can I use it? It's really cool, blah, blah, blah. But it made me realize that we probably have listeners out there who may not be so familiar with the lingo that's being thrown out. They've heard AI before, but now it seems to be used in perhaps a different context. So I thought, perfect place to start the conversation.
Yeah, really good point. And I think like a lot of things that can be sort of industry specific, you end up with a lot of this sort of word salad, don't you? Or alphabet soup. You get a lot of these acronyms and it gets quite confusing. I think the term AI, even apart from recent times, has been horrendously overprescribed, like certain medications in recent times, but it's very heavily used to describe usually things that are mundane, like automation. I think it's a bit of marketing fodder, if I'm honest. I think it's very cleverly used and I don't blame people for using it that way, but I think the term gets conflated with other things. So I think really quickly unpacking that and discussing that might be useful. So AI, or artificial intelligence, is a very fascinating concept that in and of itself is almost born as almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy from science fiction, which has happened several times. I mean, things that were back on the old Star Trek ended up becoming real technologies, for instance. So sometimes this does happen. But the idea of a near sentient or sentient kind of machine that is human in just about every way is really, really far off. So let's start from that baseline or that footing. Machines are not taking over the world and taking jobs and things like this. They are starting to pick up pace and replicating what humans do from a mundane and repeatable process. Let's admit that, though. What's really interesting, I think, about this is that a lot of what's capturing and captivating people in the sort of media is ChatGPT. That's really going to be the focus of what people know in context of this. But really what that is a use of large language models. You can Google this, we can link to it, but effectively they're training these large machine learning kind of environments on how to respond to your input. So you write it a set of prose, you ask it a question, and it's going to use, try not to be too much of a geek, but I mean, it's going to use linear regression to kind of weight inputs, bias, and then give you an output on what you've given it. It's not magical. It seems magical, but I think what's really happened here is that they've removed the barrier of access to so many people. There's an accessibility here that's incredible. It functions like you're using WhatsApp or typing into a Google chat. And really, the output from these things are considerably accurate and well defined. So you can chuck in what's the best restaurant to go to if I'm in Portugal and I'm allergic to fish, which would be embarrassing and unfortunate, but it could probably spit out a nice paragraph about what's good in the region and a list of places and their phone numbers. And it's getting to be to the point where it's digesting a lot of information for people and making it very accessible. Now, is that artificial intelligence? I don't know. I mean, that's the pub question, and that's the fun thing to debate. But it's certainly a very useful and effective use of machine learning. which is kind of just a sub element of AI. But maybe that's splitting hairs and nobody cares.
Yeah. So Tim, first of all, I'm glad that Skynet is not on the horizon tomorrow, although who knows, that robots are not taking over the world yet. I keep seeing the dancing robots that I think it's maybe Boston Scientific who's made. They keep showing videos of how these robots dance better than I do. I just want to make sure, though, we heard a buzz. That is not the robots telling you to be quiet and you're being silenced. So you're safe there, right?
Yeah, I'm safe.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Proof of life. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right. So let me ask you, and when I hear AI, I think back to the 80s and war games, right? A game where it seemed like a movie where it seemed like the computer was running scenarios and thinking on its own.
Whopper. That was the name of the computer.
There you go. All right. So let's, I want to talk about at a very basic level, and maybe I'm dumbing this down, but keep in mind, again, some of our listeners they may not know ChatGPT. They may not have used it yet, or perhaps they've installed apps on their phone that leverage it. But in a dumbed down way, is this like us entering a Google search and the AI is going, and rather than presenting us lists of probable hits, it's taking the information that's on all those web pages, or many of them, and providing back a response that is taking all of that information, processing it, and essentially learning from it to then give us what is most likely relevant and responsive to the prompt we've input.
That's exactly right. That's spot on.
Got it. And look, I will admit, I've been playing with ChatGPT, whether it's to get fun information. I'm not allergic to fish. I'm also not traveling to Europe anytime soon, but I do love that idea. I have actually used it in the context of helping draft a first draft of a document. For example, a playbook on how to pursue a particular target market. I know friends who've used it to create spreadsheets for upcoming trips to determine itinerary or potential itinerary.
There's a lot of I think cost savings in that respect, and I mean human and time cost as well, not just raw cost. But my wife's launching a business, for instance, and she's very, very much a visionary and has a great idea and has all these investors kind of circling around, and that's all spinning up. But what she's absolutely not good with is creating things like tables and financials and these kinds of things. And just shy of making me do all of it for her. She can punch stuff into Google Bard, which is similar, and it more like what you were talking about, Jonathan. It goes out to the wider internet, in this case, the Google search universe, and it aggregates things for you. But it also does simple things like, hey, I need an 18-month run rate for a business with a budget of X, and these are the costs for people and supplies and all this. Can you build me a table? And it'll spit something out that looks pretty near perfect without a whole lot of work. And I know you don't have a whole lot of love for Excel, Jonathan, so you might find some use in that as well.
Not a fan of the pivot table. And for those who've seen my spreadsheets, unless I've gotten help, that it looks like a kindergartner did it. We may even have to go preschool. But yeah, not a huge fan of it. It's a necessary evil. Maybe I'm going to have to play with some of this AI that's out there. So let me move from kind of what it is and how people might interact with it, right? We're not getting into the world of prompts. I've seen a ton of LinkedIn posts about, ChatGPT prompts. I'm sure with Google's offering, I'll see some of those. But I've read stories about individuals who are putting company information into ChatGPT. For example, having ChatGPT analyze lines of code to determine if there are any issues with it. So what I'd like to ask you is, do you find that there are actually data protection and privacy concerns that come with some of these more accessible platforms?
Wow. Yeah, that is a topic du jour. I mean, amongst, a small group of us over here anyway, I don't think you'd find people in the pub talking about this necessarily, but it's a very interesting topic. I would hazard a guess that a lot of the people making use of an open prompt like Google Bard or OpenAI's Chat GPT are putting information in there that they probably shouldn't. That's a fair guess. I mean, I wouldn't know what percentage, but I bet it's more than you'd be comfortable with. The issue that I have with that is somebody who's acutely aware of how technology works, and really just the state of the information age we're in, kind of post 2005 or 6. Everyone started to become the product because they weren't paying for things. When you had an early Gmail beta account and these kinds of things, we quickly knew it was too good to be true. I mean, what is it they're getting from me? They're providing me a world-class mail and storage service for nothing, really. So it's something you got to keep your mind on. We started noticing a similar problem where it didn't happen in our team, but we knew of document review teams in different environments that were considering, I don't know if they ever did, but they were trying to put documentation through Google Translate, as an example, Babelfish or whatever those predecessors were called. And that data is being relinquished and is being stored with those companies. So if you're putting in really sensitive data in there, if you don't speak, say, I don't know, Austrian German or some dialect that's a little bit funny to you, and it's some sensitive data related to a merger or something really confidential, you're potentially feeding that information over to somebody. And in fact, the terms and conditions usually state that becomes their property. So there's a confluence of issues that kind of swarm in here. There's like this duty of competence, there's ethical obligations, there's data protection and organizational security violations that might be happening all in one go because someone's trying to achieve some kind of push button efficiency for something. You alluded to source code, and I think it was Samsung Electronics or some element of Samsung's larger organization where they were doing this, and probably from a very benign perspective. I don't think they let out, the next generation of an operating system or anything remotely crazy, but I think they were trying to speed up or maybe even test the efficacy of something like Chat GPT to sense check their programming. And were later kind of, I don't know if they were flagged by compliance or whoever flagged it to them, but it was made abundantly clear that data was now with OpenAI as part of the T's and C's. And I don't know what Microsoft's tie-in with that is like. They were certainly large investors in the company, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that, the optics are that Microsoft now has the IP of Samsung, which, nobody would necessarily handshake agree to. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. I think people need to be a little bit wary of, what great technology can do for you at little to no cost. There's always some trade-off there.
Nothing is ever free. Nothing is ever free. So let's shift gears again. So we at iDS are involved in both working with law firms and corporations on legal matters, investigations, data preservation, all of that. ChatGPT came up recently when a lawyer actually had ChatGPT do its legal research for him and came back with rulings and arguments to make based on cases, only to find that the other side tried to find those cases, as did the judge, I believe, and they didn't exist. ChatGPT made it up. So again, we get involved in the legal space somewhat differently. We don't practice law, but I wanted to ask you, are you aware of these types of AI being used in our industry already?
Wow. Yeah, I'll try to answer that one concisely because that could go a few different ways. So more to your immediate question, I think this type of machine learning is being used in our industry by some software creators and friends of ours in this space, I think they leverage more somewhat closed off versions of this that aren't based on large, gigantic public models of information, but maybe on more put four walls around an organization's documentation. So the many millions of documents that company ABC has, that's its training model and its universe. And you can use a chat prompt against that and say, hey, find me the stuff where, we did that diabetes research in 2019, but I don't want to use diabetes as a keyword. So bring me back anything that has to do with glycemic index or blood sugar or anything that has to do with any of that stuff. And it'll say, okay, here's a whole bunch of documents related to that kind of research. And it's doing it not just based on keywords, which is very helpful. And it's summarizing them for you. That's the cool bit. So they can take 1,000 documents and say, across these, here's a bullet list of 5 things that are prevalent across all of those as a theme. That part's quite novel and cool. But my next point was going to be, our industry's been leveraging machine learning type technology for 15 years, probably more in an accepted way for the last 8 or 9, to the point that it's almost required. So, data volumes have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And, the likely relevant documents, what's disclosed, your briefing packets to a regulator, whatever you're dealing with, they're not really changing much in scope and size, but you have to get through so much more just to find it. I'm taking you a little bit on a walk here, but it's interesting to see it change in front of us, because even a decade ago, things like predictive coding and these machine learning driven, I'm thinking more of CAL, continuous active learning.
Sure.
There was a bit of a stutter start in trying to get people to adopt that and use it. With all technologies that seem kind of novel. Now in the UK, we're somewhat progressive with our discovery regime, but behind the US in quite a few ways, but certainly ahead of other parts of the world. We have a disclosure regime here that was formerly the pilot scheme, which is now a practice direction here, which Dom on our team would happily talk to you about until he's red in the face. But they now require parties to consider, I think it's point 9 in this document. They kind of prepare their budgets, what issues they've agreed on. And there's a point in there, I think it's point 8 or 9, but it asks that the parties have very strongly considered the use of predictive coding, technology assisted review, CAL, for document sets that are larger than, say, 50,000 or whatever it is. So now it's very much part of it's very much on the minds of the judiciary here that this technology has huge benefits. And if it's used properly, should be used to save people time and costs. Is this chat prompt type stuff going to go the same way? I don't know. I think because of the early pitfalls we're seeing with it, these are blunders that people will forget. They have short memories, but the lawyer getting in trouble for having case law cited that doesn't exist. I mean, it's a laugh and it's funny. There's also, it also brings up that whole duty of confidence thing. You can have the machine get you there, but you still need to probably do your homework.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that is something that I have found in what I give it. It's got a good flavor, but it's version 1. It's a draft. It needs to have some massaging. Is the best word I can come up with.
We've run it against things, data forensics being my kind of core specialism, but I've run things against it just to see, and BARD and OpenAI's ChatGPT, different variants. And I've said, I'm looking for these types of artifacts on this kind of, say, Windows-based computer or something. Where can I go to find these? And it's, again, it's a version 1. The stuff that it's giving me isn't exactly wrong. It might say, look at these points on a computer. It's certainly missing, 15 or 16 other things you should be looking for. It's not going to do your job for you.
Sure.
But it's interesting to poke it once in a while and see how quote unquote uninformed it is.
Well, so to that point, Tim, let me share this with our listeners. I took your delightfully digestible data, and my apologies, I referred to it as D3 because we lovingly refer to it as D3, which is yet more lingo. And we started off talking about lingo and AI, ChatGPT. What does it all mean? So D3 is delightfully digestible data. I took yours, I dropped it into ChatGPT during our podcast right now. Now, the questions that I've asked Tim I came up with and with Tim's input. Well, this time I got ChatGPT's input just based on the text of your D3. And the three questions that it came up with are very similar to what we came up with. How is generative AI transforming the legal industry, and what potential implications does it have for legal professionals? Can you explain the concept of generative AI and its significance in the context of legal services? How does it differ from other forms of AI? And what are some potential concerns and considerations when it comes to using accessible systems like ChatGPT and other AI-powered tools in the legal field, particularly in terms of confidentiality, data protection, and maintaining ethical standards?
Oh, good robot. Yeah, I feel validated.
Right.
I feel validated by that.
I would pat it on the head if I could. But, what I find interesting about that is, those were all good questions, quite wordy, although people who have heard me talk and have met me and listened to other podcasts know that I can be wordy, quite wordy, but also not as conversational as one would want for a podcast. So I feel like ChatGPT, you got it close, but not fully there.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, maybe a closing remark. I mean, I'm not really clock watching if you are, but I certainly want to, keep these punchy for people. But the other thing that's been coming up quite a bit, not just in London, but in, we were just in Dublin for the last couple of days talking to a whole load of clients and friends. It'd been a few months, and this is still a very salient topic in the legal space, in the consulting world and tech world. And, multiple people from different directions have largely disputes lawyers. I will say that has been a bit of a theme. The disputes lawyers seem most concerned with it, and fraud lawyers a little bit. But it's this concept of, well, what can I do to determine whether a document was drafted by one of these generative AI systems, or if a human being actually drafted the prose? Which one was it? And that's tough. And that's something we're keeping a watchful eye on. At least I am, being forensically minded. How do we prove provenance and integrity and veracity and all of that throughout the chain? I don't have a really good answer for it, but in some of the conversations we've had, we've keyed in on a few blurbs from some of the kind of mothership entities, IBM, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google. And I think there's a bit of awareness of this going on. And I wouldn't be shocked if there was something going on right now to remedy it. I don't have any insight in this specifically, but I can see some kind of watermarking going on. When it's just text, that's tough, but I suppose they could modify their models so that result and output always have the same kinds of words near each other at ends of sentences or lines or something, where you could turn a machine back on it and say, hey, this is really unlikely a human wrote it because of where these words are placed, or something like that. I mean, I could see it being done that way. The thing we always laugh about, Dan Ruprecht always says this, but they can't get the fingers right with the imagery.
Oh, right, so right.
Journey or Dolly or these, and they look really good. I mean, they are between a real photo and kind of a New Yorker cartoon sometimes, but some of them are very spot on. But when you zoom in a little bit, the fingers, look like Freddy Krueger or something. They aren't quite right. You don't get that with text. Words are words. So yeah, looking into ways that determining whether a human wrote that or a generative prompt wrote it is it's going to happen. It's going to be part of a dispute. And I also wonder if some of the lawyers aren't, kind of sweating perhaps their junior lawyers or trainees. Maybe they wonder if they're using these to write briefings or something. So yeah. I think maybe it's a little column A, column B.
Well, we'll have to make that the topic of a future podcast for sure.
Yeah.
Well, definitely. So before I close this out here, if our listeners and subscribers want to get the copy of Delightfully Digestible Data D3, how can they reach out to you to get it?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, we always, my email's available. I think we put it in the comments of these podcasts. It's on our website. We'll link to our website. Even better. We're very open door accessible that way. So yeah, I mean, if you're happy to be added, contact Jonathan, myself directly, and we'll get you on that list.
Excellent. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Tim, for joining us today, as well as our regular subscribers and those that may be first-time listeners. If you'd like to learn more about IDS or want to subscribe to our IDS Talks podcast, you can visit idsinc.com or wherever you normally get your podcasts from. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to talking more about data with you on our next edition of IDS Talks podcast.
Thanks, everyone.